A few years ago, when I was a senior in high school, my school organized a one-night picnic in a rural area quite far from the city. We used to think that this picnic would be the happiest trip in everyone's life because this trip was the last memory of our school days. But perhaps it was just a wrong thought because that trip left us with a haunting memory. We also lost a friend who was once very close. My school bus arrived just as the sun was starting to set, and it was dusk. The bus stopped next to a small village. My class teacher at the time became a reluctant guide, directing us to gather in a line to avoid getting lost. She advised us to care about our time and told us not to go out without her permission. At first, my class at that time was very obedient. We excitedly took our luggage off the bus and prepared to wait for the moment to check in. After packing up, our class had a walk around the local market before dinner started. While walking, a group of girls was attracted to a scary scene. All their attention was on the strange house in the area. Behind the big fence gate was a man tied with a thick chain. This man let out a devilish laugh, his eyes widening as if they were going to fall out. His mouth was torn open to the ears. After looking closely at him, they realized that there were scary scratches behind that wrinkled skin and very scary blood-red lips. After seeing the scary man looking at them, the group of girlfriends were all scared and shouted, then pulled each other away at the same time. By late afternoon, our students were present and gathered at the hotel. Then, it was the time when we were free to do what we wanted. The group of girls from earlier gathered into a group to eat snacks with the class teacher, then told her the story of the scary man they had met at the market earlier. After listening, the teacher thought for a while and said that people in the village often told each other that there was a cursed straw scarecrow in the middle of the village's wasteland. If no one looked into the scarecrow's eyes immediately, as crazy as that man did. Our students did not know the truth of the story that the teacher told them at the time. We only felt it was something haunting. I thought it was just an ordinary gossip story when suddenly, disaster struck our class. In the middle of the night, two students escaped to the moor to go on a date and enjoy the scenery together. The two sat under the night sky looking at the stars in the sky, discussing the upcoming college entrance exam and promises. But after a while, the male friend felt like fiddling with something and started looking around. Unknowingly, some invisible power prompted him to look ahead of the moor and call his female friends to take a look. The two discovered a very large straw scarecrow standing in the middle of the field. The straw scarecrow kept swaying in the wind, like some invisible magic calling for the male friend's attention. The female friend suddenly remembered the class teacher's story before and felt a little uneasy. But in contrast to the female friend, the male friend was extremely excited. He took his girlfriend's hand and asked her to run with him to the scarecrow's place. But the female friend was too obsessed with the story the teacher told earlier and didn't know if the wasteland the teacher was talking about was here or not. So the female friend still didn't dare to go with the male friend to the scarecrow's place. As a result, the male friend thought his girlfriend was a coward and decided to go to the scarecrow alone to prove his bravery. Although the girlfriend in the back kept calling and advising the male friend to come back, in a moment she saw him walking to the middle of the field, passing through the rice field. After that, the male friend walked in front of the straw scarecrow. He planned to bring the straw scarecrow to his girlfriend's place on his own. It wasn't until he came face to face with the straw scarecrow that he realized that it was no ordinary straw scarecrow. Somehow the scarecrow's eyes were red like blood. By some magic power, its whole body moved and let out crazy laughter. When the student saw the scene, he was so scared that his face was pale, his mouth was speechless, and he couldn't utter any more words. Until the student knew he had encountered something evil, he shouted and ran for his life. He ran to his girlfriend and told her to run back to the hotel quickly, much to her surprise. He He didn't bother to explain anything more. He just grabbed the female student's hand and pulled her quickly back to the hotel. In the final moments, the female student also turned to look at the strange straw scarecrow, clearly feeling it was glowing and chasing the two. The following morning, there was a chaotic incident for all the hotel staff and our students at the whole hotel where we were staying. For everything to go smoothly, the teacher immediately asked the female students to go back to the room together so that she could deal with it outside. But not long after we returned to the room, there was a scream of fear from the class teacher outside the hallway. The students in the room were also surprised to go outside to listen, and the whole corridor immediately became crowded with people. After several calls to the hospital, students in my class stopped in front of a room with bewildered eyes. The person in the room was a male student. He didn't know what was wrong with him, but he frantically smashed and scratched his face with his hands. After a while, he was silent, making many people mistakenly believe that he was gradually regaining his composure. Unexpectedly, when he raised his face to look at everyone, he revealed his madness with a form that no longer resembled a person. He scratched his face with his hand. The corner of his mouth also revealed a wide and vague smile. Everything happened at the hotel at the time. The girlfriend also witnessed this. She believed that her boyfriend was cursed by the scarecrow in the wasteland. Moments later, local medical staff also showed up. More and more people came to watch, making the scene extremely panicky. The female students outside looked at each other fearfully and said that the male friend was being transformed into the same crazy man they saw in the marketplace. The medical staff took a lot of time to restrain the male student with a thick blanket and then bring him to the hospital, waiting for his parents to pick him up. Only the female friend who had accompanied him that night was truly haunted. She still couldn't forget the face and look he gave her when the doctor put him in the ambulance. His face and mouth were now covered with red blood, his eyes were crazy, and his skin was pale like a completely different person. After the incident, we quickly got into the bus and left with a tense atmosphere. Most people were worried about the other male friend's condition. As for the female friend, she couldn't stop crying, her eyes filled with sadness that no one could soothe. Perhaps it was the most memorable and terrifying trip of our student life that all those present at the time could not forget. This is a scary story which happened in 2019. Something about an experience with a young man named Kalim. This guy was a gangster who worked as a debt collector and security guard at small bars in town. Kalim was on the road that day when he got an unexpected phone call. While lighting a cigarette and talking about work, a loud noise behind him made him turn his head in surprise. A car honking loudly and traveling at high speed was speeding towards him. It seemed that the car was losing its brakes. The driver's face was panicked. However, there was nothing the driver could do. Kalim did not have time to react at that time, and the car rushed towards him at breakneck speed. The impact was so strong that Kalim was thrown to the side. The car's tires were all broken at that time, and Kalim only saw the sky and earth darkened before him. The car which hit Kalim also stopped on the side of the road. Kalim was unconscious because the impact was so strong. It also tore his clothes. There was something very scary on Kalim's biceps. A fearful tattoo suddenly changed his face to become more aggressive. What was happening to Kalim? People around him quickly ran over and called for an ambulance. It was fortunate that he was not in mortal danger. Let's go back in time a bit. A day ago. In order to look cooler and individual or goofy, Kalim went to a tattoo parlor at the end of town to get himself a cool tattoo. I've chosen a tattoo. You can do it right away. Just look at that. So cool, hey? The tattoo artist previewed the image that Kalim requested to tattoo. It was the image of the Hell King. The tattooist had warned Kalim in advance not to get that tattoo, but Kalim decided to ignore it. The tattoo artist carefully tattooed the best possible tattoo on Kalim's hand to please the customer. However, he still warned Kalim that tattooing the Hell King was taboo. He also warned him to be careful, because bad luck might happen. And if he wanted to remove the tattoo, he must wait at least a week. Kalim was very satisfied with his tattoo. He felt like he was stronger and more bohemian. He just kept looking at himself in the mirror and admiring himself. Kalim didn't think the Hell King's tattoo was bad luck at all. He believed that the Hell King represented the most powerful, evil things. Maybe now everyone would think he looked very cool. And of course, bad luck did happen to Kalim the very next day. Although the accident did not kill him, it definitely frightened him. Because it would take a week to remove this tattoo, Kalim had to ask a shaman to remove the curse from this tattoo. The shaman invited him to a deserted alley in town. He burned the votive paper and prayed for something. Kalim also knelt beside him, showing remorse. As soon as a week passed, he would definitely remove the tattoo and sincerely beg the Hell King to forgive his sins. The shaman then created a straw effigy with Kalim's hair. He then mumbled something that Kalim could not understand. A lot of scribbled words were also written above the dummy, which seemed to be charmed. Then the straw dummy was also thrown into the burning fire. It seemed that this was a substitute ritual to help Kalim escape his current unlucky situation. The bad luck of the day caused him to be injured. If the bad luck had lasted a week, Kalim wouldn't know what bad would happen to him. Next, the shaman told Kalim that the ritual still had an important part. The bad luck that Kalim had was partly due to the bad things that he was doing. The tattoo on Kalim's body was just punishment for him. Kalim wanted to get out of it. He had to give up the evil path he was on and find some good things to do instead. He also added that actually printing a picture of the Hell King was not a crime. The Hell King was fair. He would only punish those who were guilty or those who did not know how to repent. After hearing what the shaman said, Kalim seemed to have a vague understanding of something. The shaman continued to instruct Kalim that soon there would be an important ritual. Whether or not it would work would depend on Kalim's bravery. The shaman said to follow him through this alley. Even if Kalim heard someone's call, there would be no answer. Kalim had to ignore it and go straight forward. When the fire went out, it was time for the shaman to walk. Kalim also followed behind, and at this time Kalim felt very tired. His mind was hazy, and he wandered off unconsciously. The air was getting colder and the shaman was walking slowly with Kalim following behind. Neither of them said anything, making less noise. The wind started howling, scarier and scarier. At this moment, Kalim heard something. The cry sounded familiar, and he woke up. The shaman said to Kalim to calm down and go on, don't care about anything. The voices, however, brought Kalim to a halt. He felt his mind go blank. He also suddenly understood something. Memories of the past had rushed back, and Kalim realized his bad luck today was the payment for the sins he had committed. He slowly turned his head, looking toward the source of those familiar sounds. He was sure enough behind them were shadows beckoning him. Kalim knew who they were and why they were there. They were the ghosts of people Kalim had killed. His ex-girlfriend, his debtors, all of whom were forced to death by Kalim. He seemed to realize the sins he had committed. They were always an obsession in his head. He walked away apologetically. He understood that his bad luck did not come from the Hell King, but from the sins that he had caused to those unjust souls. Khalim was completely apologetic. He felt remorse for his actions in the past, and he also wondered why he was in this mess. The shaman understood Khalim's mind. He walked away without turning back, advising Khalim to return to the path of honest business. As long as he knew how to repent, Khalim would no longer have had bad luck. He told Khalim to remove the tattoo because the King of Hell never gave anyone a second chance. The ways he helped Khalim only lasted a week. It all depended on the determination and repentance. The shaman also advised Khalim to get an honest job and do many good deeds, as many as possible. After listening to the shaman, Khalim expressed his gratitude for the help. However, his mood was still very heavy at the time. He asked the shaman with a tired face if the evil spirits would forgive him. The shaman could not answer this question either. A week later, Khalim went to remove the tattoo. He found a job at a supermarket, and the bad luck did not bother him anymore.
It occurred in 2008 in a small village north of Hiroshima, Japan. That was my real-life experience as a child. That year, during the National Day holiday, my father drove from Shimane to take me and my mother home to see my grandmother. I was only 10 years old at the time, and I loved the countryside. I was fascinated by everything there. I kept asking questions and making my parents uncomfortable throughout. We drove for more than 4 hours and arrived in a village around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Grandma's house was still a typical country house at the time, with a large yard and 2 rooms, 1 main house and 1 warehouse. At the time, I could only visit her twice a year, once for National Day and once for the Lunar New Year, so my grandmother was desperate for me to return. But I was not used to her zeal because I hadn't seen her since I was a child, and I was not particularly close to her. When we entered the house, Grandma and my parents were discussing their daily life. I looked for a chance to get away from her grip. I would never dare to go out by myself, so I climbed the ladder to reach the warehouse roof. There were only high-rise buildings in the city. As for standing here and being able to see the entire village, it felt very new to me, so I stood here and looked around. I suddenly felt chills behind me as the sky darkened. I had the impression that someone was keeping an eye on me. I looked behind unconsciously and I felt a shadow passing behind me. I quickly turned around and saw a shirt hanging on a bamboo pole next to the chimney. The roof of Grandma's warehouse connected to the neighbor's house, and the clothes were on the neighbor's roof. But this wasn't a problem for me. My parents and I fell asleep after dinner that night because we were tired. But unexpectedly at midnight, I had a nightmare. I was not sure why the shirt hanging on the roof of my neighbor's house appeared in my dream. In the black mist, that piece of shirt kept getting closer to me, and it was becoming clearer and clearer. As I looked closer, I noticed a figure dressed in clothes hanging from a bamboo pole. I gradually realized that the man was an elderly man, his face contorted in pain, and he was terrified. The old man got closer and closer until he was right in front of me, his mouth wide open, as if he wanted to scream at me. I could feel him screaming, but I couldn't hear anything. The old man pressed his mouth to my ear and made strange buzzing noises, and I had no idea what he was trying to say. I had the impression that he shouted for a long time in the dream, but I couldn't understand a single word. I was not sure how long the situation would last. I could feel my awareness fading. Then I heard my parents' voices calling out to me. I struggled to open my eyes, seeing my parents' worried expressions in front of me. "Wake up, my son," my father said. It turned out that I was screaming while sleeping. So many strange things happened at once. My father asked, "What happened to you? You kept screaming in your dream, and your body is sometimes hot, sometimes cold." My parents were concerned about me and woke me up. I was feeling strange on the inside, so I told them about my dream. After that, I fell asleep again until dawn when I woke up. I overheard my mother say that I appeared to be dreaming again. My parents didn't think much of it at the time, but they had to inform my grandmother anyway. Surprisingly, as soon as my grandmother heard it, she became enraged, as if she knew what had caused it. However, my grandmother did not say anything clearly at the time, but instead walked out the door and began cursing. Grandma was a typical rural old woman. When she was angry, her words were difficult to bear, and my parents were powerless to stop her. Grandma scolded the neighbors, sounding like she was scolding an old man. Grandma's scolding was becoming increasingly louder. Her language was becoming increasingly unbearable, and this was the first time I had seen her so enraged.
If I hadn't made your ancestors' graves for you, you wouldn't be where you are now,
my grandmother exclaimed. To be honest, we didn't know what was going on, but I thought Grandma's scolding like this was extremely inappropriate. Dad approached her and drew her into the house because we didn't want her yelling at the neighbors any longer. We all found it strange that Grandma's anger remained after she was dragged back. My father inquired about what had happened and why my grandmother was so enraged. Grandma drank 2 sips of water and then told us a story about the neighbor's house. It turned out that the neighbor's house was previously considered a poor household in the village, but the house was recently purchased and relocated for more than a year. Once upon a time, this family had an elderly man who lived with his son and daughter-in-law. That family's daughter-in-law was a fierce woman, especially unfaithful, lazy all day and forcing her father-in-law to work hard. He was also old and frail. It was said that when he was younger he was terrified of his wife. When his wife died, he let his daughter-in-law rule and he worked very hard. His daughter-in-law once asked him to go to the river to water vegetables at noon. He started to be dizzy as a result of heat stroke. He couldn't stand, so he fell into the river, wouldn't get up, couldn't get up, and eventually drowned. The old man died just like that. Looks like he had a grudge that he couldn't swallow, because when he died, one eye was closed and the other was wide open, as if he was unwilling. Ever since that day, there had been rumors about ghosts appearing in the neighbor's house. Nearly every night his daughter-in-law's screams could be heard by his neighbors. It was said that the daughter-in-law dreamt of the old man every night, wanting her to follow him, and that every night she woke up startled, unable to sleep. Then, not knowing where she learned how to solve it, she found an old shirt worn by the old man when he was still alive. She put it on a bamboo pole and erected it on a chimney. According to a legend, this allowed the old man's ghost to bask in the sun like fire during the day, and at night it was as cold as an ice pillar. When my parents heard what my grandmother said, they were all enraged because of such a daughter-in-law. My mother exclaimed that she was to blame, and my father agreed, saying, "It's a shame that the old man can't be at peace until he died." Grandma didn't say anything else after seeing my father and mother react so angrily. Things went on like that. I had no problems, and my grandmother urged my parents to go back to the city. Grandma was concerned that I would be injured again. Every time I returned to my hometown, I discovered something new and liked a lot of things. But after that incident, I was a little scared. When I left, I discovered that shirt still hanging on the side of the chimney, and I was not sure if the old man was a living ghost. This happened when I was about 10 years old and living in my old hometown, a small village. Most of the people in the village chose to work as farmers, trading fruits and vegetables to the big cities, but my family was a little different. My father discovered that selling mushrooms was a lucrative business, so he began trading in easy-to-grow mushrooms. Mushrooms grew very well and made a lot of money for my family because of the soil compatibility, but he didn't grow them at home. Instead, on a mountain near the village where it was quieter and had a better climate to grow mushrooms. That day while eating, I overheard my father telling my mother that he would have to go to the mushroom farm tomorrow to check on the situation. I was curious and wanted to go there to see what it was like to grow mushrooms, but my mother stopped me. My father, on the other hand, was interested because I had begun to care about the family business, so he agreed to let me come with him tomorrow, despite my mother's persistent nagging. The car arrived early the next morning to pick me up with him. It was a small truck owned by a villager who worked as a hired driver. My mom came out to see me and my father off. She saw us got into the truck, while she continued to remind me to follow my father and never deviate from this path. Because it was a truck, there were no passenger seats, so my father and I sat in the back of the truck. Seeing how worried I was, my father reassured me that everything would be fine. He'd just go up there for a bit and then return home. The truck just kept going forward, leaving a cloud of black smoke behind. I fell asleep 2 or 3 times, but still, we hadn't arrived every time I awoke. My father said it took more than an hour. I also wonder why it took so long to go to the edge of the village. My father explained that the truck couldn't go fast because the road was very difficult and the ground was full of rocks. At this point, I noticed that instead of houses, I was seeing craggy cliffs and tall grasses because no one had cleaned them in a long time. The truck couldn't go fast because one side of the road was a deep abyss and the other was a cliff. But it was okay because we would arrive after more than 10 minutes. My father told the driver what time to come back to pick us up and then said goodbye to him. My father and I then had to walk up the hill, following a small path surrounded by dense forests. We had walked for a long time and still hadn't arrived. I was tired and sweaty. My father had no intention of stopping to rest and he warned me not to stay in this forest for too long, so he urged me to try a little harder. Fortunately, it only took about 20 minutes to get there, even though my legs felt like they were about to fall off and breathing fast. Then I noticed a small house with numerous mushroom-growing mounds in front of it. Inside there was an old man. He poured water for my father and me to drink, and my father immediately discussed something important with him. It appeared to be related to the sale and export of the mushrooms to the other regions, but due to some difficulties, they discussed it tensely. I was thirsty and drank a full glass of water while my father was continuing to converse with the old man. I was too young at the time to understand what the two of them were talking about. I was just sitting still and a little bored. This place wasn't so entertaining as I expected. After that, I felt the need to urinate, so I asked the old man where the toilet was, but he said it didn't exist and that I could go to the yard and go whenever I wanted. So I dashed out the door to deal with it. My father and the man were still engrossed in their conversation, not paying attention to me leaving. I was pulling up my pants after I finished when I noticed a large white rabbit in front of me. The rabbit noticed me and dashed into the woods. I was bored, so when I saw the rabbit I chased it for fun, not remembering my mother's advice before leaving. The rabbit kept running faster while I was trying my best to catch up. I couldn't keep up with it until it reached the fence that separated the mushroom growing area from the forest. At the time, I was hesitant to go further because it appeared to be a little dark in front of me, but the rabbit seemed to want me to play with it, and when I stopped, it also stopped and turned to look at me as if waiting for me. I jumped over the fence, no longer worried, and went straight into the forest ahead, engrossed in chasing the white rabbit without knowing where it was leading me to. After a while of running, I came to a T-junction and the rabbit vanished without a trace, leaving me perplexed. Then I slowly walked back, looking around for the white rabbit. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see it. How could it go away so fast? I'd seen it ahead of me and then it vanished just like that. I was walking around looking for it when something touched my forehead from above, as if it were hanging down from a tree. I panicked when I looked up because that thing was a body. It was hanging down in front of me and my forehead had touched the feet of the body. I couldn't move my legs and couldn't even scream. I could just stare at the body hanging from a tree branch above my head and panic. This was my first time seeing the scene and it freaked me out. I would never forget what I'd just seen. His face was gray and decomposing. Insects were eating his face. I quickly gathered my courage and turned to flee. But as soon as I turned around, my eyes were met with something even more horrifying. When I was chasing the white rabbit, I didn't see this at all. It was a series of bodies hanging from the trees. I guessed more than 5 people had committed suicide here. I wasn't sure if there were any other bodies in the forest. But I didn't have time to think about it because the panic made me freeze. My legs couldn't move. I thought my heart could jump out of my chest. My eyes darkened and I passed out without realizing it. I couldn't remember what happened after that. All I remembered was hearing my father's voice in my ear when I woke up. It appeared they found me and brought me home. The old man and my dad both knew what was going on. They just didn't know how I got into that place because the area was deep inside and the road was difficult to go to because of the many turns. I inquired about the bodies, but the old man and my father did not want me to know about them, most likely because I was too young to understand these matters. The 2 of them simply asked me to rest for a while and then return home. After a while, when I became older, I heard people in the village talking about those bodies. Apparently they were hired workers for a large company in the area, but were exploited to the extreme. So they chose suicide. This horror story happened 7 years ago near Xingxing Farm, China. This experience was considered a memorable one. That year, I was heartbroken because my girlfriend of 2 years left me. I signed up for a 4-day tour in Guangxi province with a group of guests. Most of the people in the group were older men and women, and I was the only young man. After we walked around on the beach, the guide continued to take us to a farm on a large mountain to see the forest landscape. To me, it didn't matter where I went, as long as I left the city where I lived to forget about my story of heartache. Because of the city being so small, almost every corner had memories of my ex-lover and myself. After visiting the beautiful natural scenery of the farm, we were arranged to rest in a renovated hotel from the villa. The condition of this villa was good. It had an observatory outside. The scenery in the distance was beautiful. Thanks to that, my mood gradually improved. Actually, now that I thought about it, I felt stupid. I realized that in this world not everyone could walk together for a lifetime when in love. Maybe this was my first love, so it took me a long time to forget. On the farm, it got dark very quickly because it was surrounded by forest. It was especially quiet. The elders who accompanied us took an early break. There would be no excursions in this forest in the evening, so I slept early that night. I remember that I slept until midnight. After 11 o'clock, a humming sound suddenly woke me up. After being woken up, I couldn't go back to sleep. Once again, a particularly shrill sound resounded in the stillness of the night. I couldn't sleep. So I decided to get up and go outside to look for that sound. I wanted to see who did what to disturb people sleeping in the middle of the night. Following the sound that was coming from, I went to the back of the villa and saw that no one was there. In the backyard, there was only a large stone mill. I saw that no one else was there. I raised my ear to hear it, and the sound seemed to come from this mill. At that time, I found it a bit strange. This mill weighed several tons and seemed to have been thrown straight to the ground. How could there be a sound if no one moved? However, after I got close, I discovered a strange phenomenon. This large mill seemed to be covered with charms, although the rain and wind made them slightly fade the color. My house was also in the countryside, so I was not unfamiliar with this, but I had never seen such a peculiar stone mill. I could be sure the sound was coming from below the millstone. I kept putting my ear to the mill and listened. This sound was so shrill, like someone below was bumping into a big stone mill. This thing scared me. Was anyone here? Or was there a secret below? I thought. My curiosity also surfaced. I saw a cork on top of that large stone mill and knew that this was a screw hole. I didn't know what I was thinking at the time. I didn't hesitate at all to approach and unscrew the cork. As soon as the cork was pulled out, there was an explosion, and some cold air appeared. It seemed that the bottom was isolated from the outside world. How could the creature below survive? Humans or animals couldn't survive below this without air, so what exactly hit the rock underneath? How did that thing get down there? I put my eyes into the hole and peered under the stone to check. Sure enough, the bottom of the stone mill was empty, like a deep dark well that was hard to see. But after observing for a while, my eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness. When I saw everything in the well, I couldn't help but be startled. Under the well, there were dozens of human skulls. They thickly piled up. I didn't know how old these human skulls were. The black eye sockets of those skulls seemed to be looking at me, looking very scary. I felt that those skeletons had turned into resentful spirits. They were rushing towards the mouth of the well where I was looking down. This thing scared me. I quickly backed away and my eyes left the hole. However, at that moment I saw a dark cloud rush out of the mouth of the hole. The dark cloud hit me right in the eye, and I immediately felt a sting, a very uncomfortable feeling. After stinging my eyes, I felt dizzy. I tried to scratch my head and pull my hair. That feeling made me nauseous for a while. The world was spinning, my eyes were dark. At that time, I only had one thought, that was to return to my room quickly. But then my mind suddenly lost control and my body could not move anymore. There were many people talking in my ears, but I couldn't understand a word. Before I fell, two figures appeared in front of me. They asked me, "Why are you here at this hour?" They seemed to be talking about my situation and how to save me. I didn't remember anything anymore. "Looks like he did it," said one. While unconscious, I had a strange dream in my dream. I saw a group of Japanese soldiers walking into a small mountain village with guns in the hand. There were a few people dressed as villagers, hiding in the shadows and attacking the Japanese with stones and bricks. They used familiar terrain to attack quite effectively. Soon the Japanese soldiers had their heads smashed. The remaining Japanese soldiers panicked for a moment. Their formation became more chaotic. The Japanese soldiers were killed by unexpected stones thrown by the villagers. When the villagers hiding in the shadows ran out and killed the Japanese soldiers, they piled up Japanese soldiers' bodies. They cut off the heads of those Japanese soldiers. Their heads were covered in blood and looked terrible. The villagers threw the soldiers' heads into a dry well. The dry well in my dream was very similar to the deep well under the stone mill that I saw tonight. The heads fell and gradually disappeared into the deep darkness. I don't know how these images that only appeared in anti-Japanese dramas appeared in my dreams, but then I dreamt of the big stone mill. The whole of the great mill was constantly releasing black gas, and there were wailing voices. Finally, the wailing sound disappeared, but it became the thumping sound I heard tonight. The great mill was also full of curses. Everything was slowly becoming blurry. There were really souls in that deep well. After that, my consciousness seemed to have recovered a bit. Those strange dreams disappeared. I could hear people moving around, but my eyes couldn't open. I felt someone cut a small cut on my forehead with a sharp knife. Then the man burned a paper talisman over my head, and he put the paper talisman in a jar. I also didn't understand what this meant. Then, like a steamer, he pressed it to cut my forehead. I could almost feel my blood being sucked into the vacuum cup. I could be sure that my feeling was right at the time. But during the whole process, I couldn't keep my eyes open even though I wanted to. When I was fully awake, the sky was clear. I jumped out of bed and the story last night seemed to have never happened. But there was a sharp pain in my forehead. This wound reminded me that everything last night was not a dream. I covered my forehead and went to the villa owner to ask him what had happened. But from them I got a completely different answer from what I felt. The answer seemed reasonable, but I really couldn't accept it. I didn't know if I was thinking about that. I always felt that the villa owner was reluctant to tell the truth. I turned and ran into the yard, wanting to see the big mill from last night. But when I saw it, I was stunned. A large glass plate was placed around the stone mill. Looks like it was just brought in there, so it looked brand new. The cork that I remembered was pulled out last night was now pressed again. 2 new talisman symbols crossed across the cork. If everything went according to what the boss said, how could all of this be explained? After that, I went to ask the owner of the villa again. They said the stone mill was a cultural relic, and the paper talisman was used by villagers for blessings, not for exorcism. I knew I would be powerless because I had nothing to prove, so I stopped arguing with them. And when I went through that night, I didn't know what to say now. And as I experienced this night, I was left speechless.
A long time ago, I told my close friend about a camping trip I went on a few years ago. During that camping trip, I encountered a strange thing. That also was the last time I saw my travel companion. To this day, I still couldn't contact him. A friend in my group was also curious to ask if I had tried contacting that friend again. But the truth was that I went to his house in a high-class apartment block down the street, but still no more news. When my close friend heard about it, he was skeptical and didn't know what was wrong, so he could only reassure me to go to the police to see if he could help. When I heard that, I sighed because I did everything but could not. By the way, I also told my close friend about that strange camping trip of mine. At the time, I had an appointment with that companion, my college classmate and another female friend to join a mountain climbing camp organized by ourselves. We set off very early because we had to catch the bus to a remote suburb. This place was famous for its high hills and dense forests full of mysteries. When we got there, we were so excited, everyone was anxious about the upcoming climb trip. After arriving, we decided to rent a small room near the hill to rest because it was also late. That night we slept at the motel and only wanted all of our energy to spend the next day's expedition. Before we started, we also heard horror stories that happened in the same forest. But with our stubborn nature, we decided to ignore the rumors and head straight for the hill as planned. After going into the forest for a long time, we could not see another turn. I was afraid that we would all get lost if we continued further inside. So we all discussed whether we should stop and pitch a tent here for fear that the deeper we go, the more dangerous we would be. At first we were hesitant, but because there was a woman in the group, we also decided to set up to our camp right at the edge of the forest, near the road going down the hill to ensure safety. During our lunch break, the whole team ate and talked about what we needed to do that evening. When it was dark, we decided to go deeper to facilitate exploration but still keep a safe enough distance to run down the hill when something went wrong. We were halfway down the street when this female friend said she needed to go to pee and told us to stand here and wait for her for a moment. I advised her not to go too far and then talked with the other companion and discussed with them whether to choose this flat place to pitch a camp or not. I was afraid that if we went deep into the forest, there would be no phone signal. After agreeing, we decided to set up camp here. When the female friend returned,
We had finished everything. The female friend who saw us from afar rushed over and said that she had encountered a perverted and strange man that surprised the two of us. The female friend said that when she went to pee, she accidentally caught this man standing behind a tree and following her. At first, my companion seemed to not believe her. He thought no one would pass by in such a deep forest. But the female friend kept insisting that a man was following her and pointed towards the deep forest. Then she took us to the place where she saw the man, but when I got there, I only saw a big cliff. At the time, my travel companion thought it would most likely be an interesting experience, so he suggested camping in front of this rock to see who the mysterious man was. But as soon as the sentence ended, a man in his 40s appeared from nowhere with a strange gesture. This man looked at us with a sharp eye and asked who we were and where we came from, and kept saying we had to get out of this forest quickly. Then the female friend in the group confirmed and concluded that this was the man she had met earlier. The strange man heard what we said as an insult to his honor and became very upset. We all blamed him at that time, thinking he was a pervert. My companion always scolded and threatened not to let him come near our camp. After that, we decided to go back to our camp and not care about the strange man anymore. That night we sat in our camp. We casually ate and talked happily. After eating and drinking, we discussed that we would take turns guarding between two men, and my companion volunteered to be the first on duty, and I would go to the camp to sleep first. The other female friend, seeing this, was also embarrassed and said that she would go to the other camp to sleep. After that, we split up, one camp per person, and began to rest. The whole forest sank into the inherent stillness and silence as if nothing had happened. But after sleeping for a while, the female friend in the camp suddenly felt uneasy, so she softly called out to my friend. After receiving no response, she pulled the camp down to check, but no one was outside. At this time, the female friend felt worried, so she ventured out. She went out alone to look for her friend in bewilderment. She followed the old road to see where the other friend was. After a while of looking for him with no result, this female friend returned to the original cliff where we came from. By chance, she met the strange older man from earlier. Knowing she was looking for a friend, the older man turned his face back, and as if to say that her friend was inside the cave. So she immediately ran straight into the cave, calling out the name of her friend. But once inside, she saw no trace of her friend, nor heard any reply. When she was about to turn back, she saw a small light at the end of the road. Curious, she walked over and discovered a mausoleum. There was a shadowy figure there. It was none other than the friend in the group. She didn't know when he came here, but he was busy looking for something. The female friend went to ask questions out of curiosity, only to find out that this male friend accidentally found an ancient tomb. The owner of this tomb must be a person of royal background, because there were many precious gold and silver jewels around her body. But strangely, no one knew who this woman was and when she died. The parched flesh of her face still showed no sign of decay. Both of them were very excited when they saw a lot of expensive treasure. Together, each person took away all the possessions in the tomb and put them in their backpack. After taking it, the two quickly pulled each other out. As soon as they came out of the cave, there was strange laughter inside that attracted the attention of both of them. The female friend thought it might be the strange older man's voice. While the two were bewildered, from inside a figure staggered over. When the strange figure came outside, the young couple trembled, not daring to say a word. The strange man from earlier suddenly changed, becoming a twisted corpse with his head turned back. The brave male friend took his flashlight and threw it at the strange man. But the man looked at both of them with bloodshot eyes. His face was as calm as he knew it all. Then he slashed with his hand, causing the flashlight to break in two, then chased after the young couple with an axe. Because they were too scared, the two found a nearby rock cave and went inside to escape. But when they thought they were safe, there were strange sounds behind them. Because the male friend wanted to protect the other female friend, he immediately signaled the female friend to run away just as the man with the axe appeared. He stood close behind the male friend, then raised his sharp iron axe and flashed a devilish smile. The male friend was scared to run away but was held by this man. Then the man used an axe and hit the male friend hard. The female friend witnessed the scene and ran away in panic. When she was running close to the campsite, she accidentally ran into me. As soon as she met me, the female friend hugged her face and burst into tears. After hearing the story, I asked the female friend to turn back to the camp and I called the police about the incident. In the camp, the female friend was constantly worried about the male friend because he was attacked by the strange older man. After a while, the police showed up, but when I brought the police to the scene of the incident, there was no appearance of a cave. The other man was also found later, but he said it was my friend who attacked him and fainted. To my surprise, this man added that after being beaten by my friend, he no longer knew anything. After telling the story, my friend immediately turned to ask the story. I told him that the male friend had disappeared, but the strange story here did not stop there. This strange man also said that he was trapped in that forest for a very long time until we showed up and informed the police.